Welcome, bienvenue, welcome once again to another Property Matters. As the keener amongst you will have noticed, once again, streaming with Hamish McLay. Hamish McLay, often to be found at 10 o'clock, shameless plug, on Thursdays, Property Quorum. But today, we're talking about more property matters, and with special respect to searching, and in this case, architects. Today's topic is an architect is an architect. So, Hamish, I'm going to show you straight under the bus. What do you mean by that?
Well, John actually pointed this out to me because I do come from a technical background, not that it shows. However, I do. One of my previous lives was sort of I could have gone down that particular route, but chose not to. And I see very often when I'm working with property, working in the arenas of property that I work in, that a lot of people, particularly these days, because there's a lot of people modernizing their property one way or another, or changing the property around, and you see the word architect come up all too often, and you see hundreds and hundreds of people attempting to sort of suggest that they can sell their wares as an architect. And like we've actually found with conveyancing, there's conveyancers and conveyancers, and there's property lawyers. If you go with the right one, you get the right result. However, this is where I found out that an architect isn't always an architect.
An architect isn't always an architect? Good Lord, I didn't think such a thing was possible. John, really? There are people out there calling themselves architects without any real reason to do so?
Well, there are architects and there are people who aren't architects. To be an architect, you have to be registered with ARB, the Architects Registration Board. If you're not registered with ARB, you can call yourself an architectural anything. You can design buildings, but you cannot call yourself an architect. And at the moment, in order to get registered, it's a minimum of 7 years training to above master's degree level. So there's a lot of people who think they're good enough, are not, couldn't qualify if they tried, and masquerade as architectural designers or architectural consultants in order to avoid the fact that it is illegal to call yourself an architect if you're not one. So if you want an architect, it's actually quite important to make sure that that's who you get, because we are the only profession who are trained as architects.
Well, yes, I guess you wouldn't want a dustman redoing your lawn in the same way as you wouldn't want a cleaning lady designing your kitchen.
There are other chartered professionals who work in the same field and can design buildings to an extent. Chartered surveyors rather, and chartered architectural technologists. They do a degree, but a degree is not a postgraduate degree, and it doesn't teach them anything about architecture either. It just teaches them how to design buildings. So which is the difference. There's a difference between architecture and a building that's been designed, which people aren't often aware of.
And are they quite a few of them? I mean, funny enough, I did come across somebody the other day who called himself an architectural consultant, and I said, "Well, isn't that an architect?" And they didn't say anything, so I didn't know what that was.
I do believe that the Grenfell inquiry took on board an architectural consultant as part of the the group, the team, whatever they're called, the board, and ARB had to tell them off because they weren't an architect. So they had hoped, this is the bloody government. They had hoped to employ an architect and had failed. Right. That's how good the Grenfell inquiry was.
Well, maybe they didn't realise what they were asking for. Maybe they should have been educated better. Hamish, is this a problem?
It is a UK law. They ought to be aware of their laws.
Well, one would have hoped. Hamish, is this an education issue?
Very, very much so. Very, very much so. And it is one of those particular sort of aspects. And I think one of the great things about some of the guests that we sort of bring on board with us, Gareth, to discuss either today or like we do sometimes on a Thursday, is that important aspect of everything to do with conveyancing, to do with buying and selling properties. And it goes much, much deeper than that, because I know, in fact, I mean, John's been involved with designing hospital for you. I mean, that somebody could not sort of stick their neck out and attempt to carry out work of that particular sort of nature. Some of things are very, very complicated. And I would guess, I mean, relative to what John's just sort of said there, that when we've got the Building Safety Act that's sort of come through, you really need to keep very much up to date with ongoing sort of developments. And some people will actually, they're sort of dabbling is a bit unfair. They're probably very, very good at what they do. However, they need to keep up with the legal requirements. Even the government don't appear to understand. But we met that in during lockdown, didn't we? Because it wasn't lockdown for MPs, it was lockdown for everybody else. So they made the laws and then chose to work differently. I think that's perhaps the same thing that they did. But it does make it different.
Yeah, there are some particularly chartered architectural technologists who are good, who could qualify if they could be asked. However, because in the UK, you don't need to be qualified to design buildings, there is no requirement for you to be qualified. Even under the Building Safety Act, all you have to do is be competent, and you can self-certify the fact that you are competent. It could easily have been written sensibly, but to require somebody who's designing a building to be competent, which is a subjective quality that you can't measure, is insane. So yeah, there are some good technologists, and there are some very good non-architects who can design buildings even architecturally. However, they can't be asked because they don't have to be.
So what should people be asking to find out they're getting the right thing?
Well, the easiest way is just to make sure that whoever you employ as an architect actually is an architect or a dustman. If you want a dustman, employ a dustman. If you want,
I don't think many architects would make good dustmen. I don't think they've got the right qualifications. But
I beg to differ. I was a dustman before I went to university.
Well, hey,
for a summer, got you there.
There you go. Well, I always said they were paid too well. Anyway, so the truth of the matter is, simply asking, though, are you an architect, can sometimes lead to varied results.
If you ask and they tell you they're an architect, that unless it's in writing, you can't prosecute. So if somebody says they're an architect, ask them what their ARB registration number is.
There you go. No, I think that's the definitive, isn't it? So if you employ someone, I think if I've learned nothing more today, is the first thing you do is you employ someone who's supposedly an architect, asking for their ARB registration number, and they can't provide one that doesn't match up with someone, and that someone was the person you're supposed to be taking on, then run and hide. I guess.
Well, yeah. I mean, when I was president of the Northamptonshire Society of Architects, I had someone call up and was shouting blue murder about how crap their architect was. So I asked her what his name was. She gave me a name, and I just said, well, he's not an architect. And apparently that put me in the wrong, which was a little disconcerting.
They weren't an architect. Did she not realise that meant that all bets were off? She'd made a bad choice.
Well, no, it was my fault. He wasn't an architect, apparently, which is, small round things.
Well,
I mean, it's that public perception that is a problem. I get shouted at quite a lot by technicians and technologists who say they're as good as architects, to which I say, no, you're not. You've just done a degree. if you were good enough to be an architect, well, go and qualify, prove it. And they can't, or won't, or don't. And it's, they might be as good as an architect, but go and prove it then. No, don't expect me to believe. Don't expect people to believe you. It's
What is the danger of using a someone who isn't really a proper architect?
Well, if you're not an architect, you don't have to have the insurance cover, professional indemnity. And if you are an architect, you have to have the professional indemnity cover.
Right.
You also have to abide by the ARB's Code of Professional Conduct. And in my case, because I'm also a chartered architect, I also have to abide by the RIBA's Professional Code of Conduct. And unless you're a registered architect, you've got no proof that you've got the relevant qualifications or have passed them. There are a number of people who get as far as the Part 2 and then wander around claiming to be God. But if they've not passed the Part 3, they've not finished their qualifications. So they've either failed or dropped out.
Hamish, do you come across this as you work through the profession?
Well, yes. I mean, one of the aspects of what I do, it isn't terribly often I need to engage architects or have a need to, but I speak to people who do employ architects and use architects. But it's like so much of what does go on within the property. There are people that call themselves conveyancers and they carry out conveyancing work. They're not actually qualified to do it. And therefore, the important thing is, like John was just intimating there, if you're not qualified, the thing is you don't need to qualify in terms of what I do necessarily, although I have had training in carrying out my work on searches, for example. I have had professional training and I do get it updated, and I do my CPD and sort of all the rest of it, which I don't have to do. However, I've made sure that I know what's right. But the important thing to me, you have that level of protection. There is a professional regulator behind what's going on. And like John said, if something goes wrong, and okay, it doesn't necessarily happen very often. However, if it does go wrong, you don't have a leg to stand on if you've gone down the route of somebody who has just actually sort of put their name forward and said, oh, I'll help you out to do a redesign or whatever it happens to be. If they don't have that legal protection in there, if they haven't gone through that qualification route, one of the reasons why I prefer, there's nothing wrong with licensed conveyancers. They're very experienced people. However, a property lawyer, like John says with his qualifications, they have to go through the process. It's not the short-term quick fix thing that you can actually sort of do with just an online course or something of that particular nature. They've got that legal background. They've got the understanding. And of course, that's what John's speaking about. There's quite a lot of science involved in putting a building together. And there's so much technology involved with it. I remember sort of a year of training I did in technology, but what John said is very, very true. Look for that expert. And as I said, sometimes you can't see whether it's a capital A or a small A. However, like John's actually sort of got there, the qualifications, and make sure that they are regular. It's so important. If you want to go somewhere, if it's your property, whether you be an independent or whether it's a development, you really want to make sure you're with the right person.
So qualifications are very important in this, as in all professions. Being chartered, what does that mean?
It's if I can remember correctly, it's a thing set up by the Privy Council in the dim and distant past, and it's a quality. It's an award given to that professional body that they are the professional institute and they have those standards.
It's a kite mark.
In effect, yeah. I mean, there used to be, what do they call themselves? They call themselves BIAT, the British Institute of Architectural Technicians.
Right.
When they then became a chartered body and changed their name to the Chartered Institute of Architectural Technologists. It's the same association, but the new name means they actually are a charter body with that status. When they were BIAT, it was just a group of people.
So, and you yourself, sir, you're a chartered architect. So you've done the degree, you've done the architectural exams, and on top of that, you're chartered. So is that about as far as it goes as certifying excellence? So,
well, in the UK, you can't become an architect, well, without being registered, but registered status is the same exams as chartered. It's the part 1, part 2, and part 3, which takes the 7 years. So it's the membership of the charter body that gives you the chartered status, which is in effect, it's sort of by invitation. When I was on our IBA council, we were requested by a bunch of Freemasons to admit somebody who was on the ARB register into the membership of the RIBA. We said no. As they were Freemasons, they got very shirty. It was a long time ago, and they wrote the individual councillors lots and some quite irritatingly rude letters, if you read them carefully enough. But the guy was up for fraud and was thrown out of the profession after a court case. So the fact that we didn't let him into the RIBA was the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
And that's the other problem. Any architectural designer or architectural consultant may be an architect who's been thrown off the register. Because if you've got a criminal record or fraud or whatever, you'll get thrown off the register. And you have to call yourself something different if you want to remain in business. So that's what they do. They call themselves architectural designers or architectural consultants. Right. So, not all of them. Some of them just couldn't be bothered to qualify because they don't have to. In the UK, I think it's about only 20% of buildings are designed by architects, and only 6% of housing is.
Wow.
So there's a lot of press at the moment about how badly designed UK housing is. Well,
and you think there's a reason for that?
Yeah, have a guess why.
All right, but look, I want to round this all up, and as usual, I'm going to toss the caber in Hamish's general direction. Can you round this all up for us, please?
Well, I think it's just one of those, and one of the great things we try and achieve in terms of what we do in the getting information out there is letting people know we're all aware that the property sector is in disarray for all sorts of different reasons. And when you actually start looking into this, and I'm sure the investigations, if they were carried out correctly, would start getting to the bottom of things to suggest why we end up with properties incorrectly built like Grenfell was, and materials accepted. It did not go through the appropriate channels. We haven't got time today, but it'd be interesting to let John give us a feel on who the architect was behind Grenfell.
Yeah, a quick one there. The decisions that created the fire were made by the client and the contractor by ignoring what the architect had told them.
Now, I've read this before. They were told specifically, these are fire retardant, these are not. And they went for the ones that are not fire retardant because they were cheaper. I mean, I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah, they were cheaper, and the fire safety certificates had been forged by the manufacturer and supplier. So, but the architect is now out of business for no real reason of theirs, because the
truth of the matter is they'll never work again. Certainly not under their original name.
No,
they'll never work again.
No,
and it's not fair. It's not fair. It wasn't their fault. All right, look.
We'll leave it with John, I think.
John, thank you very much for being a guest. technical issues notwithstanding. Hamish, as usual, every day is a learning day. Guys, if you are listening, if you're going to use an architect, make sure they've got the appropriate certificates and they are an architect and not some other word with the word architect thrown in there for good measure. And until next time, please have yourselves a pleasant weekend and take after your mental health. Bye-bye now.